Raise your hand if you have ever had this thought somewhere in the middle of an ordinary day, that you live alone, and that if something happened right now, there might be a gap between when it happened and when anyone knew. Not a dramatic thought, not a thought colored with fear, just the quiet, factual awareness that you are the only person in this house and that certain kinds of emergencies announce themselves to no one. I have had that thought. I had it for the first time with any real clarity about 4 years after Robert passed, when I was coming down the stairs one afternoon with a laundry basket and my foot slipped on the second step from the bottom. I caught the railing, nothing happened. I stood in the hallway for a moment with my heart going slightly faster than usual, and the thought arrived with an unusual specificity. If I had not caught the railing, how long before Daniel would have known? He lives 2 states away. We talk every week, but not every day. My nearest neighbor was at work. The answer, when I let myself think it through honestly, was possibly not until the following Sunday. That was a long enough gap to take seriously. I did not want to become someone who lived in fear of her own house, and I have not. But I became, from that afternoon forward, someone who made some deliberate and quiet arrangements, not dramatic ones, not ones that announce themselves as safety measures, just small, sensible things built into the fabric of daily life so that the people who would need to know would know, and the situations that could become serious might be caught early. I call them signals because that is what they are. Small, ongoing, quiet signals that say everything is all right and whose absence would say otherwise. I do not discuss most of them with most people, not because I am secretive, but because they are not interesting in the way that dramatic precautions are interesting. They are simply part of how I live. Most of the women I know who live alone with genuine ease have something similar in place, and they also do not discuss it. Not from embarrassment, but from the same reason you do not discuss the fact that you lock the door at night. It is simply the sensible thing. Leave a comment below as we go if any of these are already part of how you live, or if something here gives you an idea you had not considered. I find this conversation is more common than it appears on the surface, and the specific arrangements people describe are always more interesting than the general advice. The first signal is the most purely human of the 7, a quiet agreement with my nearest neighbor that we will notice each other. Not a formal arrangement, not written down anywhere. It grew over time out of the fact that we are 2 women of similar age who have lived near each other long enough to know each other's ordinary rhythms, and who understood, without saying it directly at first, that someone who knows your habits is one of the most important safety features available to a person living alone. The specific awareness that she is there, that she knows what my mornings look like, that she would notice if something looked different. This is more reliable than almost any device I have considered because it does not require me to do anything in the moment when I most need it. What it looks like in practice. If my curtains are still drawn at a certain hour of the morning when I would normally have them open, she notices. If neither of us has seen the other for more than a day or 2 without word, one of us checks. If I am going to be away overnight or longer, I tell her before I go. She does the same for me. This is not surveillance and it is not dependency. It is 2 neighbors doing deliberately what good neighbors have always done in a more informal way, made explicit so that neither of us has to wonder whether the other is paying attention. I want to say something about what having this arrangement feels like compared to not having it, because I think the difference is worth naming. Before I made it explicit with my neighbor, I was aware of a background question I had never fully answered. If something happened today, what would the sequence of events be? I had not worked through the answer, but the question was there, existing somewhere below the surface of ordinary daily life. Since the arrangement has been in place, the question is answered. The answer is imperfect, and the gap is not zero, and no arrangement between two people guarantees anything. But it is answered, and an answered question sits differently in the background than an unanswered one. That particular quality of ease is, in my experience, one of the more consistent and quiet improvements to the texture of daily life that I have made in the past several years. If you live near someone you trust and do not yet have this kind of understanding with them, I will say what I have found to be true. You do not need to make it formal or even particularly explicit about its safety purpose. You just need one honest conversation in which both of you acknowledge what you are already doing and agree to keep doing it on purpose. If you enjoy this channel and want to support my work, just look directly below the video player, right next to the subscribe button, and click the button that says join. That is how you become a Smart Organizer. Smart Organizers members get exclusive videos, a loyalty badge in the comments, and custom channel emojis. I would love to have you there. The second signal is a card I keep on the front of my refrigerator, inside a small plastic sleeve. It has my full name, my date of birth, the name and phone number of my doctor, the name and phone number of Daniel, the medications I take and at what doses, and my blood type. It takes up about 1/4 of a sheet of paper. It has been there for 6 years. I put it there not for myself, but for whoever might in an emergency need to know those things quickly. A paramedic, a neighbor who has called for help, anyone who arrives before I can tell them anything. The refrigerator is where first responders in this country often look first, because enough people know to put this kind of information there. My card is inside the sleeve, attached to the door at eye level, not visible from across the room, but immediately findable by anyone standing in front of it looking for it. The information is current because I update it whenever anything changes, which takes about 3 minutes, and the act of updating it is also a check on whether anything else on it has drifted out of date. What I want to say about the fridge card specifically is that it is the signal I think of as being least for me. The neighbor agreement and the Sunday call and the other things I am about to describe all have a quality of being for me, of providing me with some form of ease or reassurance. The fridge card does not provide me with ease. It is simply there, on the door, for whoever comes after. There is a particular and uncomplicated clarity in that. The third signal is about the phone. I keep it charged to a meaningful level, in whatever room I am in, and I do not let the habit of leaving it in one room while I am in another become routine. This sounds simple, but the natural tendency was to leave it on the kitchen counter while I was in the garden, or charging in the bedroom while I was downstairs in the evening. A phone in another room is not available to me if something happens where I am. The gap I am trying to close is the one between the moment I need it and the moment I can reach it. The way to close that gap is to have the phone in the same room, not charging somewhere else, not on a surface I passed an hour ago. The rule I use for charging is this. By the time I sit down for dinner, the phone is at least at 50%. Not because I use it in the evenings, but because anything that happens between dinner and the following morning has the best chance of being managed with a phone that was not allowed to run low during the day. This is a small discipline with no cost once it is established. It took about 2 weeks to make it automatic, and I have not thought about it since. The one thing I will add about the phone is that it changed something about my general ease in the house, beyond the specific safety purpose. When the phone is in the room with me, the house feels less remote from the rest of the world than when it is somewhere else. I did not expect that. It is a small thing. It matters more than I would have predicted. The fourth signal is a standing arrangement with Daniel. Every Sunday evening, I call him. Sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for longer. But the call happens, and we both understand that if it does not happen, and I have not explained why beforehand, he follows up. We did not establish this in a conversation about safety. We established it in a conversation about staying connected, which is the same thing approached from a different direction. The safety is built into the structure of the ordinary contact rather than added on top of it. What I want to say about this kind of arrangement is that it does not require you to burden the people who love you with worry about you, which I am not interested in doing. The arrangement is not, monitor me. The arrangement is, let us speak regularly enough that a real gap would be noticeable. That is a different thing, and the people who love you are almost always glad to have it in place, not because they are anxious, but because the alternative, which is a week of silence that could mean anything, is not actually easier for them than a Sunday call that costs nothing. I have also found, in the years since we formalized this, that the calls themselves have become something I look forward to independently of their safety function. They have a particular quality that less structured contact does not have, because both of us know it is happening, regardless of whether either of us has something specific to report. The conversation tends to settle into the ordinary rather than the exceptional. We talk about what is actually happening rather than waiting for something worth mentioning. That quality of ordinary contact is something I had less of in the years immediately after Robert passed, and I am glad to have it back in a different form. The fifth signal is the one I find most consistently useful day to day, because it is the easiest to build into the texture of ordinary habit. Before I leave the house for anything out of the ordinary, specifically anything that takes me somewhere unfamiliar or for more than a few hours, I send a brief message to someone telling them where I am going and roughly when I expect to return. A text, usually. It takes less than 20 seconds. It does not ask anything of the person receiving it except a small awareness. But it means that if I do not return when expected and I cannot be reached, they have specific enough information to act on. I started this after I drove to a town about 40 minutes from here for an estate sale and realized halfway through the drive that I had not told a single person where I was going. Nothing happened. I arrived, I looked around, I drove home. But I thought about it on the way back. A 40-minute drive on a 2-lane road in an unfamiliar direction, and if the car had gone off the road, the gap before anyone would have known something specific enough to act on would have been, again, possibly the following Sunday. The estate sale was pleasant. The drive home was clarifying. I have not left the house for anything out of the ordinary without sending that message since. Tell me in the comments whether you do something like this already, or whether this is something you have been meaning to put in place and have not quite gotten to. I ask because the gap between knowing something is sensible and actually doing it tends to be a very interesting and very human distance, and people are often closer to closing it than they think. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, I would love to have you here. I post regularly on topics exactly like this one, and the subscribe button is just below. The sixth signal is physical rather than communicative, and it is the most preventative rather than the most responsive. I make a specific and ongoing effort to keep the paths I use most in the dark completely clear of anything I could trip on. The path from the bedroom to the bathroom at night, the path from the bed to the door, the kitchen floor after dark when I might be less careful than I am in full daylight. I look at those paths before I go to bed, and if something has accumulated there, I move it before I go to sleep. What I have learned is that this requires active and ongoing maintenance rather than a single decision made once, because daily life creates small accumulations in exactly the places where we move most freely. A bag set near the bedroom door, a pair of shoes left close to the bathroom threshold, a cord that migrated from its proper place during the day. Each of these is a small thing. Each of these is exactly the kind of thing that causes a fall in the hours before dawn when you are moving quickly and not fully alert. None of them are there because I was careless. They are there because things move through the house and they land where they land. The question is only whether I look at the paths before I sleep or discover them at 3 in the morning. I clear those paths the way I clear the kitchen counter at the end of the day, not because there is currently anything dangerous on them, but because the habit of looking means there is almost never anything dangerous on them when it matters most. It takes 2 minutes. It has become as natural as turning off the lights. The seventh signal is the one I think is most underused because it requires the most direct kind of conversation, and I think we often avoid those conversations more than we admit to ourselves. There is one person in my life, aside from Daniel, who knows what my week normally looks like in enough detail to notice if something shifted. Not the specific daily schedule, the rhythm. Someone who knows that I usually walk in the mornings, who knows that a full week without some contact between us would be unusual. Someone who lives close enough to act if something needed acting on, and who I spoke to directly about this. I want you to be the person who notices, and I want you to feel authorized to follow up if you do. That conversation, which I expected to be somewhat awkward, was not awkward at all. The person I asked had been paying attention to me without any explicit agreement for years, the way people who genuinely care about each other do, and what the conversation did was simply name what was already true and give it a structure. She said yes immediately, without hesitation. I think she was, in some way, glad to be asked directly rather than to continue doing it informally without either of us acknowledging it. The authorization mattered to her as much as the agreement mattered to me. What this person provides that none of the other signals quite replicate is someone who is looking not for the signal that something is wrong, but for the signal that everything is normal, and who would notice its absence before it became a crisis. The fridge card is for after. The Sunday call with Daniel is weekly. The neighbor is for the mornings. This person is for everything in between, the irregular and the unexpected, the specific texture of a life that only someone who genuinely knows you can read accurately. I am 72 years old and I live alone and I am genuinely well. I am not managing fear when I describe these arrangements. I am describing what it looks like to live alone with both honesty and ease at the same time. Those are not opposites. The honesty is what I am willing to look clearly at my situation and make reasonable arrangements for it. The ease is what those arrangements produce once they are in place. Women who have made these arrangements tend to live with more freedom, not less, because the things that might otherwise sit as background questions have been given actual answers. An imperfect answer, a living arrangement between neighbors or a Sunday phone call, is almost always more comfortable to live with than no answer at all. Tell me in the comments which of these 7 signals you already have in place and which one feels most worth adding. I find that the most useful part of this conversation tends to be in the specifics of how other women have arranged their lives, and I read every comment. And if this is your first time here, I would be glad to have you subscribe. I will see you in the next one.